Good evening. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, California, and welcome to our online forum. We are living in times of immense challenge on every front, socially, politically, ecologically, and spiritually. We are destroying the natural systems on which we rely, making many of us feel alienated and lost. We are in one of the most profound transitions of human history, and we need a new story to reorient and ground ourselves so that we can meet these challenges. My guests this evening are Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, who are co-directors of the Yale Forum on Ecology and Religion. And they are also creators with Brian Thomas Swimme of the multimedia project Journey of the Universe. I can't think of better people to talk about the journey of who we are, how we got here, where we are headed, and how we're doing along the way. Thanks so much, Mary Evelyn and John, for joining us. It's such a blessing to see the both of you on the forum tonight. We're so glad that you could be here.
Lovely to be with you.
Yeah. You know, one of the questions I've been asking so many of my friends lately is, COVID is revealing something about ourselves. As individuals, is revealing something about our society. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what it's revealing in terms of your field of religion and ecology. Like, what are we coming to know more clearly now in this new setting?
Well, such an important question to lead off with. And I think we're learning, as many, many people understand, is the profound interconnection of humans and nature. And if this was caused by bats and human interaction, as many of these diseases have been, SARS and MERS, we have a lot to think about in terms of destroying habitat, what we eat, and how we relate to our fellow creatures. We were reading this afternoon for another project, the list of characteristics of bats, their intelligence, their echolocation, etc. We need to understand who are our kin.
Their immune systems.
Their immune systems, just extraordinary. Yeah.
I'm preaching this Thursday. We're having a memorial service on for the people we've lost. And I talked about sperm whales, that they have these extraordinary powers that we just don't even understand, social structures that we don't get. There's so much that we don't understand about the natural world. It seems like such a shame to be destroying something that could be such a rich source of new wisdom and knowledge.
Yes, I sense with our teacher, Thomas Berry, he would often make this remark, which was so arresting and gave one pause for thought. He would say, all of life is intimacy and distance. And during the pandemic, I'm continually reflect on this sense that we're so distant from one another, and we've lamented the fact that we're not able to gather and touch and embrace that intimacy caused by this distance. And yet at the same time, I'm fascinated by these technologies now in which we are communicating with one another, oftentimes much more intimately than we did before, much more actually face-to-face through this medium. But the pain of this moment stays with all of us. My family, we lost our last living sister, and she died in those COVID settings that all of us know and fear so much. She was alone with herself and the nursing staff. So again, the intimacy of staff with her, and yet her distance from her family and husband.
Yeah, I think we certainly appreciate what it means to really be with one another in a way that I just think we didn't fully understand. Maybe we just took it for granted, I think. And just how we are such social beings, constantly picking up subtle cues and recognizing things that we don't even know at a conscious level about one another when we're together. You know, I'm so glad that you mentioned Thomas Berry, because in the early days of me knowing the two of you, I just felt like he was such a presence. And I remember meeting him and hearing him speak at the American Academy of Religion. I wonder if you can talk just a little bit about what your first impressions of him were. He just seemed so wise from the very beginning, and you met him at a much younger age, and it must have been very interesting to see him as he developed in that latter part of his career.
It certainly is one of the great blessings of our life that we worked with him for some 35 years, his students, been as editors of his works and so on, and with the American Teilhard Association also. And I'll never forget, actually, Malcolm, my first meeting with him, coming back from Japan, being there 2 years, being very disoriented and coming to study at Fordham. And I came to his Riverdale Center in February of 1975. And I walked in there. I remember everything he was wearing, I was wearing, the beauty of the Palisades, the light of the day, and so on. It was just at that time of the Feast of the Blessing of the Throats, and he was speaking in this incredibly profound way. I said, "This is my teacher."
Mm.
You had
great.
a
How about you, John?
feeling because you met him even
Yes.
earlier.
I came east in 1968 after my undergraduate years at St. John's University, the Benedictine School in Minnesota.
What a great education. I'd forgotten about that.
And the monks were kind enough to orient me with a history and religious studies background. But when I walked into Thomas Berry's office, he was 55 years old. And as we aged with him, I recall that mature presence that he had. And yet my coming from North Dakota, kind of a frontier personality, and I was obviously anxious, and I asked him, "Well, what should I call you, father or doctor or mister?" And he sat back in his chair, and his body language was so embracive and ease of relaxing. And he said, "Call me whatever you want to call me." And that's the way we set off on the learning path, this shared companionship.
Yeah, I love that. I can just imagine him saying that exact those sort of thing.
Yeah.
So how did he shape you, just in terms of just like the direction of your studies? Like, when did you decide that you're going to become religion and ecology people? Like, how did that come into being?
Well, that was a little bit later, but the beauty of Thomas Berry and his program at Fordham was that he was doing history of religions way before it was being done elsewhere, except for the big universities, the Ivy universities. But even there, Thomas understood the spiritual impact of these traditions. He saw the profound history and tradition and the languages, but he always kept to that sense of, what is it that Buddhism's really teaching us, or Confucianism, et cetera? And that was something that I had a wonderful teacher at Columbia afterwards, Ted DeBerry, who was a good friend of Thomas Berry, and he understood that as well. But many universities don't see that dimension. So it was later, actually, after our graduate studies, we said, what can we contribute to the environment? Because he was already 45 years ago talking about what this tremendous crisis that we would be facing. So that's when we began the Religion and Ecology.
We had occasion when we first got online together, Malcolm, to remember your mentor, and who was such a lovely person and a friend also, who spoke of serendipitous creativity.
Yes, exactly. I was
And Thomas Berry, when I heard Gordon first articulate that, I realized the teacher I was studying with also embodied that kind of generative thinking. So I had an occasion when Mary Evelyn gave the sermon yesterday. There was a time when it was panning around Grace Cathedral, and one of the rose windows came. Thomas Berry had an interpretation of the dialogue of the religions of the world that he called a rose window interpretation. And he said, in the window, that central window, everyone is born into a culture or has a religious tradition. And the outer windows are the religions of the world. And he said that they didn't come from Mars. They're part of the human community. They're all of us in a way. So his sense was the religions in dialogue with one another complete one another. And I found that always at such a thoughtful and generative position.
Yeah, I love that. And, that particular window was made by Gabriel Loire, a famous artist from France. And it's the St. Francis window. So there's sections that have the stars, a section that has the moon. It's all of creation from the prayer of St. Francis, that great hymn. I love the way that's. I'm never going to see a rose window quite the same way, but I love that idea that we're all those little pieces that are part of this much more beautiful whole.
And I think Oh, pardon.
No, go ahead. I want to hear more about Thomas Berry.
Well, I was struck by Thomas guided us into the cosmologies of these traditions. And so it was in this rose window configuration also that he introduced us to the sense that at the heart of these traditions are voices talking about their understanding of reality. And that's what brought us then to the cosmology-ecology connection.
Yeah, I love that. I was going to go over to Robert McDermott's house today with my son. We were in too much of a hurry. I had to get back in order to talk to the two of you. But you have so many friends all around the world who work on these questions and these projects. And I didn't realize it, but when I was coming of age and first kind of entered the American Academy of Religion and Ecology was a new thing. I wonder if you can talk about what the contribution of religion and ecology is versus like religion and ecology. And maybe you can talk even just like, in your ecology and religion book, you give like just kind of a short summary of just like what ecology is meant, where it came from. So maybe you can begin with a little short summary of where ecology came from, and then just talk about that unique contribution of that field of religion and ecology.
What a wonderful question. Do we have 2 hours?
I know, I wish we did.
No, that's so terrific. Actually, no one has actually asked that. And that's so important because what you're touching on is something we all, I think, sense. And that is that ecology in its early phases of study by scientists was actually about holism, was about seeing things, yes, the parts, but the whole. Even Aldo Leopold said, you've got to understand the cogs and wheels, but within a larger system. And that has been lost a bit in a very scientific, empirical, a bit reductionistic sometimes study. And we're saying, no, the impulse of ecosystems is, yes, complexity, emergence, differentiation that evokes wonder, awe, beauty, connection for the human. And therefore, going to religion and ecology from that perspective, I mean, everyone loves the natural world. And this is what we need to regenerate. I don't think it's that hard. But religions have also put this into form of liturgies. Why do we have these liturgies coming up around the equinox for Easter and solstice for Christmas, et cetera? Because they understood we embed ourselves in these great processes of nature. We're inspired by them. From dawn to dusk, the prayers of monastic communities, et cetera. We could go on and on. But that's part of embedding ourselves in the processes of nature, be they cosmic, be they earth, be they social and human. That's a large part of religion and ecology, in addition to what we're now truly trying to integrate is ecology and justice. This cry of the earth, the cry of the poor. And we can say more on that, but John, maybe.
Well, I'm struck by this, how ecology on the ground hit us. We went to Japan in 1982. Mary Evelyn was working on her dissertation. And I was engaged with some studies and with indigenous peoples in the East Asian world. And the impact of the industrialization of the cities and the population growth, it raised the question for us, guided, of course, by Thomas Berry's foresight in this regard. What could we, as historians of religion, what could we contribute that would help open people's eyes or help to understand what is happening, what we're doing to the planet? We could see it in these cities, Manila and Bangkok, and what was happening in their rapid population growth. And so when we came back, the possibility of a religion and ecology project began to surface for us from out of our studies and out of our on-the-ground experience.
If I could just put a quick footnote to that, especially because I'm a student of East Asia, China, well over 1 billion people, and also of the religions of India, over 1 billion people. And those of us in Asian studies could see many years ago that as India and China began to develop, modernize, industrialize, things would change rapidly. And in fact, that they would change the face of the planet. And that is what's happened. And yet, what's equity here? What's poverty issues? What's justice issues? So that was at the core of our concern many, many years ago. What's the religious message? What's the ecological connection? And what's the justice connection?
Yeah, and just hearing you preach on yesterday, there's a heart connection too. There's something about moving us in a way that's mysterious. It is a matter of love. I mean, I think of St. Augustine, that we're drawn by the things that we desire, and you're right. We desire a holistic planet, a natural world that's cared for. We desire justice for human beings. We desire fairness. And yeah, I saw it in a very different way when I heard you preach. It was good. I do recommend anybody who's watching us now to check your video out on YouTube. It was really great. I wonder if you can talk about some of just like the leading figures in religion and ecology, just people whose ideas have been formative and have helped us to really begin to see nature in a new way.
John Cobb.
John Cobb. Oh yeah, John. My gosh, he's an amazing person.
It's so wonderful you asked this, because in preparing that sermon, I was just trying to go through some of these key people. And of course, the process theologians, but Gordon Kaufman and Niebuhr and so on at Harvard. But then we also get these wonderful ecofeminists.
Yeah, Sally McFaig and Rosemary Radford Ruther.
Yes, and Heather Eaton, who's up in Canada. And then we have the African Americans. I mentioned Melanie Harris, but we've got here at Yale Willie Jennings, who's done amazing work. Where's the doctrine of creation? And that everything is animate and communicative along the lines of indigenous peoples. This is going to change Christian theology.
And having the opportunity to go on symposiums that had been put together by the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew of the Greek Orthodox religion. Yes. He has made major contributions, and his effect shows in the work in the Roman Catholic Church of Benedict and John Paul II, but then especially Francis and the encyclical Laudato Si, and Wangari Maathai. Her work in the Free Belt movement, and we all know that the Dalai Lama has been about this forever, and Thich Nhat Hanh. So there are these wonderful voices that are also very active in their communities, congregations on the ground.
And we like to say this is, the theologians, the thinkers, the historians, and so on. But it's also, we say it's a field, religion and ecology, but it's a force. And right there at your cathedral, you've had Sally Bingham leading the Interfaith Power and Light for 20 years.
Rowan Williams.
Exactly.
But there's a lot of on the ground, the grassroots movement. And our website on religion and ecology has many, many of these grassroots movements, as well as the statements and bibliographies and so on. So there's a lot happening. It's very exciting.
There is. I would love it if you could tell us more about Journey of the Universe. That was, I remember seeing it a few times, and I love the project. I wonder if you can talk about how it came into being, and then just what you learned in doing it. I mean, I think, we complain so much that scholars in the academy don't know how to talk to normal people. And I thought it was a great way of reaching, beyond the boundaries of the academy. And I wonder if you can just talk about that project.
Well, it was many, many years in the making, because Brian Swimme's been a friend for as long as we knew Thomas Berry. And of course, he's a great storyteller and a brilliant thinker. And we're all influenced by Teilhard de Chardin and Thomas as well. So we came out to live in Berkeley, as I mentioned yesterday, to work with Brian, and also to work with this remarkable director and other people in the area, David Kennard, who had worked on the Cosmos series with Carl Sagan. So we found, of course, in the Bay Area, many, many creative people. And we would meet with David and Brian in this little cottage we had in Berkeley. And we started to outline, what the key thing is, what can you put in and what you have to leave out. Right. So that was one of the main things. And then where would we actually film? And we chose Samos in Greece because that's where Pythagoras lived, and also Aristarchus, who was the first to understand that the earth revolved around the sun.
And the effort was to put together a film that would be evergreen, not dating it over much, but something that would put forward ideas that we could think through and think together with. And when we released it in 2011, we had occasion, we did a course down at Princeton, and working with some of the undergraduates there, we showed the film at the local library, the Princeton Library, and rows of children were seated in front of the adults in chairs. And I thought to myself, now here's a good test. If these children can bear the excitement or stand the narrative of the journey of the universe, and they were with it the whole time, especially the animal scenes, they really came alive and got it. But that to me is a very important sign of the inner vitality of this Journey of the Universe project.
Yeah, just one other thing, actually, next week, the 25th of March, is the 10th anniversary of the release of the Journey of the Universe film here at Yale.
So amazing.
We had a conference, 2 days. We had all kinds of wonderful people here. And we're going to do a webinar April 10th to celebrate that with Brian and others, including next gen people, some of our students who are bringing this out, in high schools and different genres, Montessori schools, et cetera. So it's an exciting moment.
And Malcolm, there's also a dimension of these two projects that we like to keep distinct, but they're obviously thread into one another, namely the Religion and Ecology project and Journey of the Universe. And we'll sometimes speak, well, the religion project is overtly oriented towards people who are coming from a faith perspective or who have a sense of a religious tradition. And Journey, we wanted to speak to people who might have a spiritual inclination, but might not be overtly connected with a religious community. Well,
that's what I love about it. I mean, in a way, what it is to go back to Thomas Berry's image of that rose window. Your religion projects are about each one of those sections, and that film is about the whole thing. And I like the way that it's doing everything it can to not exclude people unnecessarily. It's a lovely project. I think too, just doing something in a visual medium is just so different. I mean, I'm sitting in my dining room table. I've got 6 of your books stacked all around the computer screen. And you've been very adept at that, but I wonder if it was hard to adapt to just the visual culture part of it, and just how much you would be involved in that, or did you just kind of accept other people's guidance for that part?
That is a great question too, because it was a huge learning curve, and that's why it took us 10 years to make that film. Quite a few years to write the script and figure out. We had a trip to Samos just for deciding the places we would film, and then 2 more trips to film, one during the day and one at nighttime and so on. So there was a huge amount of thinking. We were very lucky to have David and some other excellent filmmakers. But I'll give you just one example that John likes to take. I mean, we were involved in every step of the way. This wasn't something we turned over. Even the editing, and Brian spent so much time in the studio. And when I was out there, I did too. Every single image, we had Patsy Northcutt worked so hard, and Catherine Butler too. But here's one example, getting the film lined up, of course, with Brian's speech, getting the images just right that we had to drop in and so on, and then getting the music.
Oh, yeah.
And we'd be here on the East Coast, it'd be 11 o'clock at night. They're still working back there at 8. And we'd be there every 3 seconds. We'd have to be deciding on the music and so on. You might want to.
Well, I had this idea that it was original music and the composer would simply write the music.
Right, completely.
He would do 10 seconds. And he would say, well, do you like the flow of it at this point? And then he would give some directions, 3 or 4 directions that are possibilities. And so every day he would be going through literally seconds of the music, and we could feel his compositional mind unraveling or unfolding as we were listening to his music.
Oh, I love that. You know, in one of these books over here, you mentioned James Parks Morton, the Dean of St. John the Divine, and just talk about some of the things that you appreciate about just his love of the earth and how it found expression in that extraordinary cathedral. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. Just, I mean, this is like a step removed from the college for the academy, and we're really on the ground. And I wonder if you just have ideas of what worked well in different religious communities, and how do you help draw people together for special events? What those events look like? Just any suggestions you have for someone who's concerned about cathedral life.
Well, he was certainly a dean, green dean, amazing. And he, of course, made Thomas Berry a canon there.
Yes, right. That's,
but I think it's just like what you're doing, Malcolm. He had extraordinary speakers in the forums and giving sermons and so on. And he also created this Linden's Farm community, drawing on the Irish image there. And he had, Gary Snyder, and he had William Irwin Thompson, then he had Mary Catherine Bateson, and all kinds of people coming together, meeting maybe 4 or 5 times a year. So it was an intellectual community and so on. And of course, our very dear friend, Paul Winter, the musician, was central to that. And he was immensely inspired by both Thomas and Brian. And he lives, fortunately, not far from here, so we see him and his wife often. So, it's the music that opened that up. Imagine this Earth Mass and the solstice, which is now 40 years old. It just opened it up both to the medieval church and to the new church of our present moment, where animals are welcome, where people of different faiths and so on are welcome. He made it an amazing place. And I was in graduate school at Columbia, so we would just run over there.
Go across the street.
Yeah. It was amazing.
Yeah, there are Buddhist lineages that use the metaphor of perfuming, that certain images or ideas or words literally perfume and cause to rise up in the mind all of these thoughts and images. That's what Jim Morton was about.
Yeah,
he was a perfuming type of person. He exuded this kind of serendipitous creativity that Gordon spoke about. And he was he had that a skillful means to allure people and to bring people from a tightrope walker to an orator. He was just an amazing creative person.
Yeah, what an inspiring figure. I know the two of you have both studied just so many different religious traditions. I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts, maybe John, on indigenous traditions and their contribution to our understanding of ecology. I would love to hear you talk about Confucianism too. But I would love to hear something from some other non-Western tradition that we might take home as kind of an inspiring word for us as we struggle with how to make the planet, a thrive.
Yeah, we speak here from Quinnipiac country, Pequot and Mohican peoples, and I'm so pleased to see now so many institutions have land statements. And when I hear these land statements, I realize how important that is. And then the next step, where we begin to really implement some of the thinking that Indigenous people, that they have brought us towards, we become allies in that thinking about human-earth relations. And that's where Thomas Berry, he was pointing, both of us, but myself especially, working in Indigenous thought and then eventually connecting with Indigenous families among the Crow people, for example, Apsaloke people in Montana, and their welcoming of Mary Evelyn and myself into family traditions and also into attending ceremonial life, so that we could see ways in which their worldview and their cosmologies entered into their prayer life and the ceremonial life, and people who were in many ways deprived of the affluence or riches of communities we knew, but still they were able to bring together their commitment and to carry through on the ceremonial life in which the local land and biodiversity were celebrated and renewed in these rituals. So this has been a moving force in our ongoing work too.
Yes, and thank you for mentioning Confucianism, which of course is very, very close to my heart, as it was for Thomas Berry, these two traditions, indigenous traditions and Confucianism, were absolutely key to his thinking. And Confucianism isn't, of course, well known yet in the West, and that's partly because of the huge language barrier. It took me many, many years to do the translation for my PhD, and 25 years later, I finished another translation. But I wanted to make a connection with Confucianism and journey, because I see someone saying more on journey. And so Confucianism is this sense of concentric circles, right? From the human that's not a hyper individual, but part of society, of family, of the political world, the educational world, the natural world, and the cosmic world. And everything we do is related like ripples in the pond, but also that we complete the cosmos, the earth, and human. We are co-creators with these vast processes. They actually speak of heaven is my father, earth is my mother, and a small creature as I has a place in their midst. Now, all of that we built into Journey of the Universe. We built in all the cosmologies of the different world's religions. And in fact, when Brian is getting onto the boat at the end, he says, what if we imagine ourselves as the mind and heart of heaven and earth? And that is directly from Confucianism, because the mind and heart are one. They're not two. It's not dualistic. So this is an amazing tradition, which I hope will be even better understood and appreciated in the West, but it's embedded in Journey. And when we've shown it in China, they get it. I write the characters on the board and they are completely fascinated. We showed it last October, 77,000 people watched it. That's how interested the Chinese are in this type of perspective.
Yeah, and I'm glad. Now that you mentioned that it's evergreen, I completely realize that it has a life. It's not connected to the things that were happening in 2004.
That's the hope. That's definitely the hope.
It raises questions. For example, evolution is often reduced to the biological world, but Journey raises the question, what does it mean to live in an emerging, changing universe?
Yeah, exactly. It's a wonderful story. I think the two of you as being such extraordinary teachers, and I wonder, I mean, you've taught generations of students, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how the students have changed from when you first started to now, and just how teaching is changing too. I mean, I think that might be something that it's something you alluded to for sure, John, when you talked about COVID. But maybe you can talk a little bit about just the work of teaching and how students are changing.
We were actually privileged to have a dean at our School of the Environment, Peter Crane, who urged us to take our courses online. So we started a flipped teaching method where we would do all of our lectures online and all of the readings. Students would respond to a question, read one another's postings, and then come to the class totally prepared to enter into a discussion in ways that we hadn't experienced before. So the online experience prepared us for COVID. It was an easy step for us. But we found one major point that I would say, we do not have to describe or convince students of the environmental problems anymore. Right. They're right there.
Yeah. And what we did with those hybrid courses is we made 3 online classes for Journey of the Universe, including one on Thomas Berry. So those are free on the Coursera site and so on. And now we're doing something similar. It's a year-long project, but we're putting up 5 courses on the world's religions and their ecological dimensions. So, we're trying to take advantage of this technology and so on. But I also just want to say what's so striking is the resilience we're experiencing with these students at Yale right now. We get on the class, we're looking at them, we're checking in, how are you doing? It's remarkable. It's very inspiring. Yeah. So we know many students are struggling, and especially, grammar school, high school students, but we're very blessed to see this remarkable resilience.
Yeah, I feel like I learned so much from people who are between the ages of 18 and 25. There's a way in which they're so much further ahead of me on certain social issues and understanding the vocabulary for social issues.
Yes, for example,
Yeah.
the integral ecology position where social justice and eco-justice go hand in hand. They are two sides of the same issue. For students nowadays, that's taken for granted.
Yeah. And the other thing is about journey and the next generation. We have some wonderful young people working with us who are so passionate about it, because like I had one student in my office 2 years ago, and he's saying, I'd lost a sense of meaning and purpose. And then he starts to read a passage from the book and he starts to weep. He said, because this restored my sense of where I belong and what I can contribute. So that's where these students, they're so committed to this because they see how they can connect that back to high school students. And as I mentioned, Montessori also, which has a big place for journey.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking that line from Psalm 23, he restores my soul. And I think that people need that right now. And I mean, there's so many reasons just to despair. And it's kind of hard to find where you're going to be able to make your contribution.
Definitely. And partly because evolution was taught without meaning and purpose. And all of a sudden you can see the zest, the excitement, the complexity.
Well, Thomas Berry would draw on his own studies as a cultural historian and remind those of us who were his students that there were 4 very active modes of revelation in the medieval church. And certainly scriptures and the historical revelation and the interior, the human heart and nature, the natural world. And I feel that's at the heart of both of these projects too that we're about, is to request people or to lead people to look again to the world as a revelatory experience rather than simply an aesthetic, but certainly that also, and wonder as a revelatory experience in the world.
Yeah, I mean, John Calvin, you mentioned that somewhere in here too, but the idea of the book of nature, that God's glory is all around us. It's just that there's something that's preventing us from seeing it. But we have a tradition, one of our traditions, I should have told you this before we started, we take questions from people. So Rebecca's sending me the questions, and so the questions are starting to come through. So I don't want, I've been completely monopolizing you, and now we have some good questions. There's some really good ones. Here's the first one. The power of the pulpit is so strong. How do we invite more courageous sermons about climate change dangers?
That's a great question. And I think the question is disempowerment and empowerment, right? From despair to hope, from worry to possibility. And I think we need to find that middle ground of we are at as you began this, at the most critical point in human history, probably. And yet we see the next generation and Greta Thunberg and so on willing to take this up. So I think if we're able to, we like to say, this applies maybe not only to climate change, but to environment as a whole. Can we think of our children and their children? Can we think of health, their health, ecosystems health, earth health? Can we make it even as simple as food? And what are we going to eat and water, et cetera? Food, health, children. It's like, where can we find common ground? And then we go into these problems to say, climate change is disrupting our food system. It's look at Texas and the West and this dreadful storm that just went through, and people are reduced to almost nothing. So we've got to connect the dots as well. The rising seas, Miami, all the coastal areas, et cetera. And I think we are. The insurance companies are coming out. The banks are coming out. We're at this turning point of not investing in fossil fuels. And look at the protests, especially of indigenous peoples, with the pipelines, the pipeline 3 up in Minnesota. It's just unbelievable. And the coalitions on these issues are so inspiring.
Yeah, those are definitely signs of hope that we seeing all over the place. Here's another question. Thank you for your inspired sermon and talk. Please talk about Hildegard of Bingen.
So even back in Thomas Berry's day, there was a fellow graduate student working on Hildegard. And so she has been, of course, the greening person of immense proportions, both her music and her poetry and her writing. What a great gift. And, there's been many like Matthew Fox who've helped to bring back some of these great thinkers, and Richard Rohr is doing some of that as well. So the tradition has a great deal to offer, and Hildegard is right at the forehead.
In her artwork also.
Her artwork, I was going to say that, yeah.
There's an interesting connection I find with the perception, and the intimacy of regard of the native peoples in seeing personhood throughout the world. And in Hildegard's illustrations and images, quite often you see the world is populated with presences. It's not simply trees and bushes and grasses or whatnot, but it's people embedded in these images. So I think Hildegard had a very strong sense of the living universe, or living world.
Yeah, I definitely do. And the music is so beautiful too. Margaret Miles was my teacher who introduced me to Hildegard of Bingen. How do you think social media plays into our evolution? That's another question from our audience. Social media and evolution. John, you touched a little bit on it earlier, I think.
Yeah, the sense of the intimacy and distance of the world too. But I can recall Oren Lyons, the Haudenosaunee elder, now in advanced age and still very vibrant thinker. And Oren would make the comment, we have just feet above us trillions of bits of information that are flowing through the air just above our heads. And it's the kind of an amazing graphic capacity that he had to image for us that flow of information. And he wasn't opposed to it when he was saying to, but I think he was also asking us to enter into it at a pace that would bring us back into human-earth relations too. And I think that's part of what we are trying to, in our work to make these massive open online courses. We're trying to use media to generate a reflective engagement with the world.
And that film, Social Dilemma, of course, is having a huge effect of repentance from the Silicon Valley community and elsewhere. So we have to, as John just said, I think, really confront the problems there and then try and move forward for social change, environmental change.
Yeah, and I say to everyone, it's such a new technology. We have to be more forgiving that, of course, we didn't know how to use it. And of course, we're going to use it for ill. But now that it's not so new, it's time to start to figure out what the best practices are in terms of making it a humanizing force rather than a dehumanizing energy in our lives.
And there's some older voices like Jacques Ellul, whose basic line was, when technology becomes an end in itself. And we're right up against that. It's so many points in our engagement with technology.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. From one of Mary, Evelyn, and John's recent students, the pandemic has shaken up a lot of our worldview this year. What has changed in your worldview and work this year due to the pandemic? And how has it influenced your thinking about our spiritual needs as a world in the process of healing the earth and our communities? How does it change how you see our collective story?
Yeah, this collective story. I'm slowed down by the pandemic, but actually I have to confess, I love the quietness of being at home. Yeah. And I love the fact even we traveled a great deal, and that travel has diminished for all of us. And I have to say, I've grown accustomed to not missing it. And so I find the sphere of self-reflection and the sphere of working in the garden, all of that has been enhanced in this time, where I've also felt the pain of family loss and those who have been ill, and hearing the stories of fear and anguish among both colleagues and close acquaintances. So it's a taste of life in that sense. That's our experience of this pandemic time.
Yeah, and I would just add, because I'm interested in the questions that follow, but this is such a great question. I really appreciate the series of questions. And that's kind of what I was trying to respond to in the sermon yesterday, that we're in this in-between period. And let's hope we will awaken to different ways of being in the world, and that we will extend our Christian story into our earth and cosmic story. That's the main thing that I think we can do. And it will release all kinds of energy. It will release youth energy for a whole new spiritual sensibility.
I'm hoping too that we revisit health issues coming out of this period of intense medical and health concerns, that we have a chance to see the Affordable Care Act in new ways.
Yeah, I loved what you said in the sermon yesterday, Mary Evelyn, when you talked about two worlds, a world that has passed us by and a world that is yet to be born. And that is exactly where we are, is waiting to see what that world would be like, and thinking in hopeful ways about what kind of effect can we have to make something better. I'm glad that no one, and I know, thinks that we're just going to return back to normal, that it's going to be something different. I'm glad that we're at least that far along.
But that's a real temptation, isn't it?
It is a temptation. And there's like that, inertia is such a powerful force,
Yes.
Here's the next question. Oh, I love this one. So this is about Gordon's other student, the famous one. Can you talk more about Sally McFague? She had a big effect on me many years ago, but I haven't heard about her for a long time.
So I'll never forget being at AAR, and Gordon Kaufman was speaking on the nuclear issue, and the room was packed.
Yeah.
And Sally McFague was there, and so on. So, Gordon did have these marvelous students, including yourself, Malcolm. He is in the MOOCs, these online courses. That's how valuable we felt his perspective was. And Sally really picked this up and took it into metaphors that we can all understand. Earth is God's body, as God as friend, and so on, as lover. So she made this accessible. It's a little bit like what Thomas Berry did with Teilhard, taking very sophisticated ideas and making them into new story, into something we could understand. So Sally has passed away, but her work definitely lives on here at Yale Divinity School and in our students.
One of Sally's influences on myself is I have attended over the years a ceremonial in English called the Winter Dance among Salish people in the Washington State region. And Jeanette Armstrong has developed among Okanagan people attention to her people's interest in this regard. And one of the images that Jeanette has brought forward is sound of the song of all reality. And so Sally put forward images, but through her work, I'm also brought forward to the acoustic character, that the world has a sound. I met Jeanette's uncle when I was studying at the Winter Dance, Martin Louis. And Martin Louis' name in Salish is Sinpak Chin, first light in the morning. And those kind of images, Sally's work reminds me again of the image of the mysterious presence of the divine in names, in sounds, and in the singing. And Martin Louis would say, everything has a song, even a little baby, when they make their sounds, they're trying to sing.
Oh, I absolutely love that. That's wonderful. And you're right. I mean, in some ways, it's almost like she helps us interpret the poetry of the world, and helps us to see it in a new way. I feel like that there's so many people in that generation. I miss them. I didn't realize it when I was young, how that Thomas Berry wasn't going to be here forever, that Gordon wasn't going to be here forever, that Sally wasn't going to be here forever.
Yes, and Sally was so supportive during those Harvard conferences, and we could call her up, and she was always there. She was just so generous and so humble, which is rare in academics, frankly.
I know, she read my whole book manuscript and recommended it to a zillion different places. Poor thing. I mean, she was great. She was. I miss her. Okay, so here's another question. Do you think geoengineering has any promise?
This is a technology question again, isn't it?
It is a technology. You can always take a pass too. We've got more that we can move on to.
But I think it's really intriguing to feel as the climate emergency begins to really grasp us and take us, hold of us by the neck, that geoengineering of the planet will become even more prescient, demanding our attention. And so it's a kind of the technology as an end in itself. I think we have to be very careful in this regard.
But, we're very fortunate to be in touch with a lot of extraordinary scientists, and I'm on the Woodwell board for climate research and so on. And these scientists are not very happy about the possibility of geoengineering because there's no precautionary principle. The effects are enormous. And I do want to mention, Yale's just gotten this huge grant from the FedEx company, $100 million, for a new climate change center, but it's on natural carbon solutions and carbon capture. Yeah, and that's where we need to go, I think. I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, but the geoengineering is very, very worrisome, I think.
Yeah, and I think the main thing is just we have a chance to not make things so bad that we need to resort to geoengineering. So, it's imperative that we act right away. Okay, here's another question. How do you deal with young people and others about, quote, an image of God, this interconnectedness that is a substitute for God? Oh, that's interesting.
I'm calling myself to be attentive to young people to help me understand where they see the future going, because they have that touch on their own lives ahead. But this is a very interesting question, isn't it? Where, if I'm hearing it right, interconnectedness being placed in or in replacing the divine. Am I hearing the question correctly?
Yeah, I mean, almost like I'm going to read it again, and my interpretation is as good as yours is. How do you deal with young people and others about, quote, an image of God, unquote? This interconnectedness, is that a substitute for God? And I think of people who say, well, the universe didn't allow it, or something like that. But I don't know if that's what the person's referring to.
Well, it seems to me, again, that's what I was very subtly speaking about yesterday. I mean, interconnectedness is the Trinity, right?
Yeah.
The nature of God in the Christian tradition is profoundly and mysteriously interconnected. And this is why Thomas Berry said, and I put it in the sermon, that everything is differentiated. That's God the Father. Everything has subjectivity, interiority. That's the Son. And everything is in communion. That's the Spirit. But his way of using those words, his most famous phrase is, the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. It's a profoundly religious and spiritual term. So I think this is such an important question, maybe one of the most important, because as John said, journey is trying to be open to a spiritual language. The religions and their language needs to come forward too, in relation to earth and cosmos and deep time.
This is a very delicate dance, isn't it? The continuity of what we call tradition in religions, along with what Gordon calls serendipitous creativity, or what I would call the divine inspiration that is constantly flooding, the world is flooding, making that possibility apparent to us. But we somehow need to be aligned to that creativity in the continuity of the traditions we come from.
And all the mystics in every tradition didn't want to name the divine. They wanted to point to it, like the Buddhists pointing to the moon and so on. And this is why we need a poetic sensibility. And it's why that poem of Catherine de Vinck is...
that was amazing. I mean, it's just, I mean, if you thought it was amazing in Marcon Chapel, you should have heard it in Grace Cathedral. I mean, it just blew me away.
And at 99, this is a mystical vision of extraordinary
and
creativity.
Humility. I bow to. That's a deep sense of I think where we need going forward. Also, is that the humility of our journey forward.
Yeah. And, people always ask me what the future of religion is, religion dying, those kinds of things. But I mean, human beings have a deep spiritual impulse, and we're always going to have that. It's not like there's going to be some kind of breakthrough and we're going to figure out that it's all nonsense. I mean, if we're going to have that breakthrough, we'd have already had it in the last 250 years. So that impulse is going to be with us. It's just going to have a different kind of expression. And you're right. How do you know how much of that tradition that we will be carried forward and how much will be innovation is what I call it. But, inspiration by the Spirit is what John just called it.
Yeah. I love your openness, Malcolm. That's one of the most important things, right? Authenticity, openness, sincerity. And, things will emerge from that perspective. And I really want to give as I say, a shout out for the Episcopal tradition, because John mentioned Rowan Williams, and we had Catherine Jeffers Shorey, and we have people like you and Mark Andrus and so on, who get this on a very profound level, namely that religion, ecology, spirituality, and the natural world are deeply intertwined. And I do think that the Episcopal Church has immense possibility of moving this forward and seeding it into our communities, beyond church communities. So, I really urge us forward in that effort. I think it's just a great potential here.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I mean, there's so many hymns that are like almost like gardening hymns, like how beautiful the rich earth is and the roses that are coming for. I mean, there's a beautiful amount of just simple, plain nature imagery that it's a huge part of what it means to be part of this kind of community.
Exactly. And Bishop Michael Curry, who mentioned Teilhard at the wedding, that he gets it too. Anyway, I'm just saying there's a lot of people now who do get it.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Oh, here, we have a question from Sally Bingham, my neighbor, and I love this woman. I go by her house every day and I pray for her. Sally says, how do you deal with the worship of nature versus the worship of God? In education, you must face that often.
Well, you go ahead. Yeah. Well, I don't see these as dualism. That if we take Logos at the beginning of John's gospel, this inner ordering principle of all reality. Teilhard called it the within of things. Thomas called it interiority, that gives rise to this extraordinary complexity. I mean, if we see what gave rise between chance and necessity, there are forces here that are clearly divine, that had an appearance in a historic and human form. But in other words, there is a sacredness in the universe. There's a sacredness in matter itself. And that's what a Christian tradition can offer, can illustrate, can make manifest. How thrilling is that? What a vision.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Teilhard de Chardin had this wonderful encounter with a communion experience. And he would say, there's a communion experience with God, and there's a communion experience with the earth. And then there's a communion experience with God through the earth. And I'm touched by his capacity as a Jesuit and as a scientist to see that interrelationship. And when he was talking once in one of his writings to science friends, he made this comment, which is a scandal for many religious people. He said, if I should lose my faith in Jesus, if I should lose my faith in God, I would never lose my faith in the world. And that, for many people, is just a problematic statement. But of course, what Teilhard was saying was, he first was speaking to atheists. Right. And so he wanted to establish a ground where they would at least listen. And his word, and he would articulate this further with them, the world is charged, as the poet said, with the grandeur and the glory of the divine.
And I really want to thank Sally for the question, because it's so important for many, many people. And I want to thank her for extraordinary work on interfaith power and light.
Very much.
We're very lucky to have her. But I absolutely cannot believe we're out of time. We have one more minute. But in that minute, I wonder if you could just tell me just things that are signs of hope for you these days. What is giving you hope as you look forward to our next chapter?
Yeah.
Greta Thunberg, our students, the next generation, the Sunrise Movement here in the US, the Extinction Movement, all the Fridays for the Future. This is a generation that is unstoppable. And if we can give them an intergenerational handshake, there's hope looking forward.
And from those early days with Benedictine, reading the text with these Benedictine teachers and coming across the Dionysius or the pseudo-Dionysius writings early on, and the lineage of Christian mysticism that flows back to these insights of the writer who was speaking of divine rays of darkness. And that sense of encountering the uncertainty and the darkness of our times and realizing that too is speaking to us. Our suffering is speaking to us. All of it that we encounter now as the deep problematic path is filled with possibilities.
Oh my goodness, it's such a pleasure. You are two of the loveliest people I know. I had such high expectations for our conversation. They definitely were met. I'm so grateful for the both of you and for your ministry to young, people in their 20s like I was when I first encountered the two of you, and to all of us. So thank you so much for your ministry.
It's so good to reconnect.
Yeah, it is. It is. I have these important announcements that I need to read, and now that I'm getting older, I need glasses all the time. This is the last forum of the winter series. The spring series begins on April 19th with my guest, Ellie Cohen of the Climate Center. We'll be talking about climate action in honor of Earth Day. And we rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. You can give on gracecathedral.org or by texting THINK, THINK, to 76278. And again, thank you so much, Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm.
So
God
good.
Bless you both. I can't wait to see you in person. Hopefully it'll be soon. Yes, hug from 3,000 miles away.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Thanks.
Thank you all at Grace Cathedral. Thank you.
Yes.